Planet X-42 was a nightmare. The war was lost and the smoke of defeat filled the air, but then, one man walked toward the enemy. Sergeant Leo was walking into certain death without fear, but he wasn't alone. Walking right beside his boots was a tiny, silent shadow from Earth, a small black cat. The giant Krell monster stopped. Their sensors screamed danger. The tiny cat hissed, and the army of monsters froze. The sky on Planet X-42 was no longer blue. It was a dirty gray, filled with thick smoke and the smell of burnt metal. The war was going badly for the Galactic Alliance. The enemy, known as the Krell, were giant insect-like creatures with hard shells and glowing red eyes. They were winning. Across the battlefield, alien soldiers from different planets were retreating. They were tired, scared, and ready to give up. It seemed like the Krell were unstoppable. In a deep, muddy trench, an alien commander named Xyler was hiding. His heart was beating fast. He looked at his weapon, but it was almost out of power. He felt that today would be his last day. Xyler looked around and saw his fellow soldiers crying or shaking in fear. But then, he saw something that didn't make sense. A human soldier named Sergeant Leo was walking calmly toward the front line. Leo was not running. He was not hiding. He was walking with his head held high, looking straight at the army of giant insects. Xyler watched Leo closely, wondering if the human had lost his mind. But as Leo got closer, Xyler noticed a small movement near the human's boots. At first, he thought it was a small robot or a strange piece of equipment. But as the smoke cleared, he saw it clearly. It was a small, black creature with 4 legs and a long, thin tail. Its fur was as dark as the night, and its eyes were 2 glowing green circles. It was an Earth cat named Midnight. The cat was walking right next to Leo, stepping over the rocks and fire as if she was just taking a walk in a peaceful park. The other alien soldiers in the trench saw the cat too. Some of them began to whisper, and a few even started to laugh. They thought the humans were crazy. "Is that a bioweapon?" one alien asked. "Or is it a tiny bomb?" another joked. They could not believe that in the middle of a galactic war, a human would bring such a small, weak animal to a fight against 10-foot-tall monsters. To the aliens, the cat looked like a toy, something that would be crushed in a single second by the Krell. However, as Leo and Midnight reached the open field, something strange happened. The Krell army, which had been charging forward with loud screams, suddenly stopped. The giant insects stood completely still. Their long antennas started shaking violently. The Krell were famous for their advanced technology. Their bodies were covered in sensors that could detect heat, movement, and danger. Right now, those sensors were going crazy. The Krell were not looking at Leo's big rifle. They were all staring at the tiny black cat. The silence on the battlefield was heavy and terrifying. Thousands of giant monsters were frozen in place because of a 10-pound animal. Midnight stopped walking and sat down. She looked at the army of insects with cold, green eyes. Then, she opened her mouth and let out a long, low hiss. The sound was small, but in the silence, it echoed like a thunderclap through the valley. For the first time in the history of the war, the Krell did not attack. Instead, the giant monsters took a step back. They looked at each other with fear in their red eyes. Commander Xyler watched from the trench, his mouth wide open in shock. He couldn't understand what was happening. Why were the most feared killers in the galaxy afraid of a small ball of fur? The mystery was just beginning, and the aliens were about to learn that on Earth, cute does not mean harmless. The silence on Planet X-42 was heavy, like a thick blanket. Thousands of Krell soldiers, with their sharp claws and armored shells, stood frozen. They were looking at Midnight, the small black cat. Commander Xyler and the other alien allies watched from the trenches, holding their breath. They could not understand the data appearing on their scanners. To the aliens, Midnight looked like a harmless creature, but their computers were flashing bright red. The Krell sensors were tuned to detect apex predators, creatures that exist only to hunt. On their screens, the tiny cat was glowing with the energy of a master killer. They realized that while the human, Sergeant Leo, was a soldier, the creature beside him was something much older and much more dangerous. To understand why the Krell were so afraid, one must understand Earth. In the Galactic Alliance, most planets are peaceful and soft. But Earth is known as a death world. It is a planet where gravity is strong, the weather is violent, and every animal has spent millions of years learning how to kill or avoid being killed. The Krell were insects, and in the history of the universe, insects usually ruled their planets because of their size and numbers. But on Earth, things were different. For millions of years, creatures like Midnight had evolved specifically to hunt things that looked exactly like the Krell. In the eyes of the cat, the 10-foot-tall Krell were not scary monsters, they were just very large bugs. The Krell commander, a giant creature with 4 arms and a golden shell, tried to send a telepathic signal to his troops. He wanted them to attack, but his soldiers were paralyzed. Their biological instincts were screaming at them to run. They noticed Midnight's tail twitching slowly from side to side. To a human, this looks cute. But to the Krell's high-speed cameras, that twitch was a calculation. The cat was measuring the wind, the gravity, and the distance. Every time Midnight blinked, her eyes were adjusting to see the heat signatures of the Krell's internal organs. She was looking for their weakest spots, the gaps in their armor where their soft tissues were exposed. Suddenly, a young Krell soldier, overcome by fear, accidentally fired a small laser bolt. It didn't hit anyone, but the sound was loud. In that split second, the aliens saw something that defied the laws of physics. Before the sound of the laser had even reached Xyler's ears, Midnight had moved. She didn't just run, she became a black blur that the alien eye couldn't follow. Because the gravity on planet X-42 was much lower than Earth's, the cat was moving with impossible speed and power. She leaped 30 feet into the air, landing silently on a high rock. She wasn't running away, she was taking the high ground. The Krell looked up, their many eyes spinning in confusion. They realized they were no longer the hunters. They were the prey. Sergeant Leo finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost bored. "She's hungry, you know," he said into his radio, knowing the Krell could hear him. "And back home, we don't feed her cat food. We let her find her own snacks." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small laser pointer, the kind humans use to play with pets. He clicked the button, and a tiny red dot appeared on the chest of the Krell commander. Midnight's green eyes locked onto that red dot. Her body coiled like a heavy steel spring. The Krell commander looked down at the little red light on his chest and then up at the cat. He realized that the human wasn't even using a real weapon. The human was treating this entire war like a game for his pet. This was the moment the suspense turned into pure terror for the aliens. They realized a horrifying truth about humans: they are the only species in the galaxy that takes the most efficient killing machines from their home planet and turns them into best friends. The Galactic Alliance soldiers looked at Leo with new eyes. They used to think humans were just lucky survivors. Now they understood that humans were the masters of monsters. As Midnight prepared to pounce from the rock, the Krell army began to break. Their formation crumbled. The invincible insect army was shaking because a small, fluffy shadow was watching them from above, waiting for the red dot to move. The moment Sergeant Leo moved the tiny red dot, the world seemed to explode. To the Krell, it looked like a glitch in reality. 1 second, the black cat was sitting on a rock, the next second, she was gone. Because planet X-42 had much lower gravity than Earth, Midnight's powerful leg muscles, built for the heavy pull of a death world, acted like powerful pistons. She didn't just jump, she launched herself like a furry missile. She flew over the heads of the frontline soldiers, landing silently on the head of a giant Krell warrior. Before the insect could even raise its weapon, Midnight's claws, sharp as surgical needles, found the soft gaps in its neck armor. With a quick, precise movement, she sliced through the vital wires and flesh. The giant Krell fell to the ground with a heavy thud, dead before it even knew it was being hunted. The Krell army panicked. They began firing their plasma rifles in every direction, but they couldn't hit her. Midnight was a master of the shadows. Every time a laser beam passed near her, she used her incredible reflexes to twist her body in mid-air, landing on walls, ceiling pipes, and the shoulders of her enemies. To the Krell, she was a ghost. Their high-tech targeting systems were designed to lock onto large, metallic objects like tanks or armored humans. They were never programmed to track a small, organic creature that could change direction in a fraction of a second. The battlefield became a scene of absolute chaos. The Krell were accidentally shooting their own teammates because they were so desperate to hit the tiny black shadow that was dancing through their ranks. Commander Xyler and his alien troops watched from the trenches in total silence. They weren't cheering yet, they were too terrified to move. They saw the Krell Queen's elite, Shadow Guard, a group of invisible assassins, move into the field. These assassins used advanced cloaking technology that made them completely invisible to the eye and to radar. Xyler thought Leo and the cat were finally finished. But Midnight didn't need eyes to see. Her whiskers could feel the tiny changes in air pressure as the invisible aliens moved. Her ears could hear the sound of their hearts beating inside their shells. She turned her head toward the empty space and let out a growl that sounded like a grinding engine. Then, she vanished into the darkness. A few seconds later, the air was filled with the sound of breaking glass and screaming insects. The invisible assassins were being ripped apart. Bits of broken technology and green blood appeared out of thin air as Midnight destroyed their cloaking devices with her teeth and claws. It was a massacre. The most feared stealth units in the galaxy were being hunted by a creature that didn't even have a gun. Sergeant Leo didn't move a muscle. He stood in the middle of the field, leaning against a broken piece of a wall, calmly watching his cat work. He knew that on Earth, cats are not just pets, they are the perfect biological machines. They are the only creatures that hunt not because they are hungry, but because they enjoy the challenge. The Krell Queen, watching from her command ship, realized she had made a terrible mistake. She had studied human weapons, human ships, and human soldiers. But she had never studied Earth's biology. She didn't know that humans live alongside predators. As the night went on, the Krell army, the same army that had conquered 10 solar systems, began to retreat. They weren't running from the humans' bullets, they were running from the sound of a purr. The suspense in the air was thick. Everyone knew the battle was over, but the war's biggest secret was still hidden. The Krell realized that if a tiny cat could do this much damage, they never wanted to see what a human would do if someone actually hurt the cat. The Krell Queen was desperate. She could not accept that her massive army was being defeated by a single soldier and a tiny, four-legged creature. In a final attempt to win, she sent her largest war machine, a giant mechanical walker the size of a building, armed with enough lasers to level a city. The machine stomped onto the battlefield, its heavy metal feet shaking the ground. It ignored Sergeant Leo and pointed all its weapons directly at Midnight. The Krell logic was simple: if they killed the demon, the human would lose his spirit. The giant machine charged its primary laser, a bright red light growing in its center. The alien allies in the trenches covered their eyes, thinking the end had come for the brave little cat, but then, the atmosphere on the battlefield changed. It wasn't the cat that moved this time, it was the human. Sergeant Leo, who had been calm and relaxed the whole time, suddenly stood up straight. His face, which had been kind and smiling, turned into a mask of cold, hard stone. The air around him seemed to grow heavy with a different kind of danger. He didn't pick up his rifle. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small, metallic remote. He looked at the giant Krell machine and whispered into his communicator, "You made one mistake. You looked at my cat." In that moment, the aliens watching realized a terrifying truth: the cat wasn't the human's weapon. The cat was the human's limiter. The cat was the only thing keeping the human calm. Before the Krell machine could fire, Leo pressed a button. From the sky, hidden human ships that had been waiting in silence dropped orbital strikes, with perfect precision. At the same time, Midnight, sensing her owner's shift in energy, didn't run away. She sprinted toward the giant machine. Using the low gravity, she leaped from one piece of falling debris to another, climbing the metal monster like it was a tree. While the sky rained fire on the Krell army, Midnight reached the main control glass of the machine. She didn't have a bomb, but she didn't need one. She began to scratch and bite at the external sensors, blinding the machine's pilot. The giant walker, unable to see and being hit from the sky, began to lean and finally crashed into the dust with a roar of fire and metal. The battle ended as quickly as it had begun. The Krell Queen, seeing her greatest weapon destroyed and her army in total panic, sent out a galaxy-wide surrender signal. But the message she sent was not a standard one. It was a warning to every other insect-like race in the universe. The message said, "Do not go to Earth. Do not fight humans. They live with monsters that hunt us for fun, and they love those monsters more than their own lives." The war was over. The Krell retreated to the furthest corners of space, leaving planet X-42 forever. They didn't want the gold or the land, they just wanted to be far away from the green-eyed shadows. As the dust settled, the alien commander Xyler walked out of his trench. He saw Sergeant Leo sitting on a piece of the destroyed Krell machine. Leo was holding Midnight in his arms, gently stroking her black fur. The cat was purring loudly, the sound vibrating through Leo's armor. She looked like a normal, sweet house cat again, not the killer that had just destroyed an army. Xyler walked up to them, his legs still shaking. He asked the question that every alien was thinking, how? How can such a small thing be so powerful? Leo looked at the alien commander and smiled. "She isn't powerful," Leo said. "She's just a cat. On Earth, she's a friend. But on your planets, you're just big bugs. And cats, well, cats really like bugs." Years later, the story of the Battle of the Cat became a legend told across the stars. Modern alien soldiers still whisper about what happened on planet X-42. They teach their children never to touch a human's pet, and they never build ships that look like insects anymore. The galaxy learned that humans are peaceful people, but they come from a world where even the smallest creature is a master of death. And to this day, whenever an alien sees a human walking with a cat, they don't laugh. They move to the other side of the street, they lower their voices, and they remember the day the Krell learned why you never follow a human and his cat into battle.